In 1947, war veteran Samuel Price stepped between a white mob and Bumpy Johnson's wife on a Harlem subway. 7 knife wounds, 7 minutes bleeding out. 72 hours later, 7 white men vanished from New York. No bodies, no arrests, no story printed. When you stand up for what's right and 7 lives disappear in return, who really paid the price? The IRT subway car rattled through the tunnel beneath Harlem like a coffin on wheels. 11:43 at night. The overhead lights flickered yellow and sick, casting shadows that made everyone look like they were already dead. 27 people packed into a space designed for 40, which meant bodies pressed against metal poles, shoulders touching strangers, breath mixing with the smell of sweat and old cigarettes and something darker that nobody wanted to name. The train car had no escape routes. 1 door at each end. Steel walls on both sides. Windows that showed nothing but black tunnel racing past. If something happened in here, you had 2 choices: stand and take it, or sit and take it quieter. Running was not an option. Screaming brought no help. The conductor 2 cars up could not hear you over the screech of wheels on rails. And even if he could, he would not stop the train. Not for this. Not in 1947. Not when white men decided they wanted to teach lessons that the law would never prosecute. 6 of them boarded at 125th Street. White faces in a car full of black ones. That alone told you what kind of night this would be. They were not lost tourists. They were not businessmen who missed their stop. They wore the kind of clothes that said docks and loading zones and places where muscle mattered more than paperwork. Work boots with steel toes, canvas jackets that hid what needed hiding, hands that looked like they had broken things before and would break things again without losing sleep over it. They spread out across the car with the precision of men who had done this before. 2 near the front door, 2 near the back, 2 in the middle where most of the passengers sat trying to become invisible. Their eyes moved across faces, across bodies, looking for the right kind of target. Not the young men who might fight back, not the women traveling in groups, the elderly, the alone, the ones who looked like they had already accepted that tonight would hurt. An old man sat near the middle door with a newspaper folded in his lap and his hat pulled low. 70 years old, maybe. Thin shoulders, liver spots on his hands. The kind of man who survived 7 decades by knowing when to look down and when to stay quiet, and when to pretend he did not see what was happening 3 feet away. His eyes were focused on the floor between his shoes, like if he stared hard enough he could fall through it and escape what was coming. One of the white men walked over and stood directly in front of him. No words. No warning, just presence. The old man kept staring at the floor, kept pretending, kept hoping that invisibility worked if you believed in it hard enough. The white man reached down and grabbed the old man's wrist, pulled it up, bent it backward slowly, not fast enough to break, not gentle enough to be anything but a threat. The old man's newspaper fell to the floor, his hat tilted. His mouth opened, but no sound came out because sound meant attention, and attention meant worse. You got money, old-timer. The old man shook his head, his wrist bent further. The joint made a sound like dry wood creaking. Everybody got money. You just forgot where you keep it. The other passengers looked away, eyes on the floor, eyes on the ceiling. Eyes on the advertisements for Lucky Strike cigarettes and Coca-Cola that promised happiness in a bottle. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. This was the rule. This was how you survived. You became furniture. You became wallpaper. You became anything except someone who noticed or cared or thought intervention was an option. The white man twisted the wrist another degree. The old man gasped. Not a scream. just air-escaping lungs that did not have enough to spare. His free hand went to his pocket, pulled out $1.37, everything he had. The white man took it and let the wrist drop like it was garbage he was done examining. See. You remembered. The train pulled into 135th Street. The doors opened. One person got off. 3 got on. The doors closed. The train moved again. The white men did not leave. They had more teaching to do, more examples to make, more proof that certain people could do certain things to certain other people, and the world would keep spinning, and nobody would do a damn thing about it. That was when my Johnson stepped onto the car at 145th Street. She did not walk like someone who expected trouble. She did not walk like someone who feared it either. She walked like someone who existed in a space where trouble was irrelevant because she had married a man who made trouble irrelevant. Her dress was simple. Her shoes were practical. But the way she carried herself said that she knew exactly who she was and what that meant in Harlem in 1947. She was Bumpy Johnson's wife. That name carried weight. That name meant protection. That name meant certain things did not happen to certain people because the consequences were biblical. She took a seat near the middle of the car, put her purse on her lap, looked straight ahead like she was the only person in the world who mattered. The white men saw her, saw the way she sat, saw the confidence, saw something they wanted to break just to prove they could. 2 of them moved toward her. The other passengers sank deeper into their seats. This was worse. This was not an old man with $1.37. This was a woman who looked like she thought she mattered. This was a lesson that would be taught with fists and fear and the kind of humiliation that stuck to your soul like tar. Violence does not need a reason. It just needs a target. And my Johnson just became the target because she forgot the first rule of survival on a train full of predators. You do not look like prey. And you absolutely do not look like you think you are exempt from being prey. The train rattled on through the darkness. The overhead lights flickered. The white men closed in. And somewhere in that car, someone was about to make a choice that would rewrite every rule Harlem thought it understood about silence and survival, and what happens when good intentions meet bad endings on a subway train with no escape routes. Eyes dropped to the floor like stones, shoulders pressed against the metal walls hard enough to leave marks. Breathing went shallow. Hands folded in laps or gripped poles or disappeared into pockets where they could not be seen doing nothing. This was the choreography of survival. This was the dance everyone in Harlem knew by heart. You see nothing. You hear nothing. You become nothing. You let the violence happen to someone else because if you interfere, it happens to you instead, and nobody is saved, and 2 people bleed instead of 1. The woman sitting across from my Johnson stared at her own reflection in the dark window. She was close enough to reach out and touch Mai's shoulder, close enough to whisper a warning, close enough to do something. She did nothing. Her jaw clenched. Her fingers twisted the fabric of her coat, but her eyes stayed on that window like it was showing her something more important than a woman about to be hurt 3 feet away. A man near the back door gripped his lunch pail tighter. He had fought in Europe, had killed Germans in foxholes and trenches and places where the earth turned to mud and blood. He knew how to fight. He knew how to hurt people who needed hurting. But this was not Europe. This was a subway car in Harlem where the rules said you do not challenge white men who travel in packs because the law will not protect you, and the consequences will find your family and your job and everything you built to keep yourself alive in a city designed to crush you. The 2 white men stood on either side of my Johnson now. One leaned down close enough that she could smell the whiskey on his breath. The other put his hand on the pole beside her head, boxing her in, making sure she understood that this space was not hers anymore. It belonged to them. She belonged to them, and what happened next depended entirely on whether she remembered her place. "Evening, sweetheart." Mai did not respond, did not look up, did not acknowledge that he existed. This was her mistake, or maybe it was her strategy. Maybe she believed that being Bumpy Johnson's wife meant something even to white men who had never heard the name. Maybe she believed that dignity mattered more than survival. Maybe she just refused to give them the fear they came looking for. The man's smile disappeared. His hand moved from the pole to her shoulder, gripped it, not gently. I said evening. The car went quieter. 27 people stopped breathing at the same time. The wheels on the rails screamed through the tunnel, but inside the car you could hear nothing except the weight. The awful weight before violence turns from threat into action, before hands become fists, before words become damage that leaves scars nobody can see but everybody carries. Harlem knew this rule like it knew gravity. Do not interfere. Do not be a hero. Heroes die on subway cars and their families bury them, and nothing changes, except one more person learned too late that courage is just another word for stupid. When you are outnumbered and outgunned, and living in a world where the law looks the other way, when certain people hurt certain other people. The man's grip tightened on Mai's shoulder. His other hand reached for her purse. This was the escalation. This was the point where it stopped being intimidation and became robbery, became assault, became whatever they wanted it to become because nobody was going to stop them. Samuel Price stood up. He was sitting 4 seats away, close enough to see everything, far enough that he could have pretended he did not. He had been reading a newspaper, had been minding his own business, had been following the rule that kept everyone alive. And then he broke it. He stood up slowly. No sudden movements. No aggressive posture. He just rose from his seat like he was getting ready to exit at the next stop. 6 feet tall. Broad shoulders earned from loading trucks and carrying things that broke other men's backs. 32 years old. Hands that looked like they knew work. Eyes that looked like they had seen things worse than this but still remembered how to care. He wore his army jacket, the one from the war, the one with the 92nd Infantry Division patch still sewn on the shoulder. He had fought in Italy, had seen Monte Cassino and the Gothic line, and places where the ground was made of corpses and the living envied the dead. He had killed fascists in Europe, had come home expecting something better, had learned that some fights never end, they just change locations. "Excuse me." His voice was not loud, not threatening, just present. Just there, just enough to make the 2 white men turn their heads and acknowledge that someone had decided to see what they were doing instead of pretending it was not happening. "This does not concern you." "I think it does." The other passengers wanted to scream at him, wanted to pull him back down into his seat, wanted to remind him that heroes are just corpses who died slower. But nobody said anything. They just watched. They just waited. They just prayed that whatever happened next would not splash onto them. The white man let go of Mai's shoulder, turned fully to face Sam. The calculation was instant. 1 black man, 6 white men. Math that had worked out the same way a million times before in a million different places, where the outcome was so predictable it was not even worth discussing. "You want to be a hero?" Sam did not answer. He just stood there. Steady. Calm. Like he had already made peace with whatever came next. Laws exist to create order, to prevent chaos, to make sure that societies function without collapsing into violence every time 2 people disagree. But laws only work when everyone agrees to follow them, and on this subway car, in this moment, in this city where the law had already made it clear whose side it was on, the law was irrelevant. There was another kind of law here, the law of numbers, the law of who could hit harder, and who would bleed first, and who would walk away, and who would be carried. That law said Sam Price was about to learn a lesson that would end with his blood on the floor and everyone else pretending they had not watched it happen. But laws, like rules, exist for a reason. They create predictability. They create safety. They create the illusion that we are civilized. And sometimes those laws need to be broken. Sometimes by fools who do not understand the cost. Sometimes by brave men who understand it perfectly and choose to pay it anyway, because some things matter more than survival. Sam Price was about to find out which one he was. Sam did not raise his fists, did not reach for a weapon, did not square up like this was a boxing match where rules applied and referees stopped things before they went too far. He just stood in the aisle between the seats with his hands at his sides and his eyes locked on the man gripping my Johnson's shoulder like it was something he owned. Let her go. 3 words. Quiet. Firm. Not a threat. Not a plea. Just a request delivered with the kind of certainty that came from a man who had already decided that compliance was optional and consequences were inevitable, and the gap between those two things was where he would make his stand. The white man laughed. The sound echoed in the metal tube of the subway car like a coin dropped down a well. His 5 friends joined in because laughter was how you signaled to each other that the threat was not real, that the challenge was already defeated, that this would be easy and quick and forgettable. Or what? Sam did not answer. There was no. Or what? There was no backup plan, no cavalry coming, no moment where the conductor would rush in and restore order. There was just a war veteran standing between violence and a woman who had not asked for his help, who probably did not want his help, who understood better than he did that help in this situation was just another word for martyrdom. The man let go of my shoulder and turned fully toward Sam. The other 5 closed in, 2 from the front, 2 from the back, 1 from the side. They moved with the coordination of men who had done this before, who had cornered people in alleys and warehouses and places where screaming brought no rescue, who knew that 6 against 1 meant this would be over in seconds. Last chance to sit down. Hero. Sam stayed standing. The first punch came from his right, fast, professional, aimed at his kidney to drop him without marking his face, to make it hurt in ways that did not show, to teach the kind of lesson that you carry inside where nobody can see it bleeding. Sam twisted. The fist glanced off his ribs instead of burying deep. Pain exploded anyway. Ribs that had been broken in Italy and healed crooked screamed protests that morphine could not reach. He did not hit back, did not swing, did not give them the excuse they needed to call this a fight instead of an execution. He just absorbed the impact and stayed standing because standing was the point, standing was the message, standing was the only thing he had left to give. The second punch caught him in the jaw. His head snapped sideways, blood filled his mouth, copper and salt, the taste of damage. The taste of choices that could not be unchoosed. He staggered but did not fall. His hand reached for the pole to steady himself. His eyes found my Johnson still sitting in her seat, watching this happen, understanding what it cost, unable to stop it. Sit down, one of the white men said, not to Sam, to my. Like she was the problem, like her presence had caused this. Like if she would just disappear, the violence could stop and everyone could go back to pretending the world was fair. Mai did not move. The knife came out so fast that nobody saw who was holding it. Just the flash of steel under the sick yellow lights. Just the blade catching reflections as it moved through the air in an arc that ended in Sam Price's stomach, just below his ribs. Once. Twice. 3 times. Fast punctures that did not waste motion. In. Out. In. Out. Efficient. Professional. The kind of stab wounds that came from men who knew anatomy, who knew where to cut to cause maximum damage without hitting bone, who had done this before and would do it again. Sam's hand went to his stomach, came away red, wet, warm. He looked down at the blood spreading across his shirt like ink dropped in water, looked up at the men who had just killed him, looked past them at the 27 people who were pretending this was not happening. No horns blared, no dramatic music swelled, no voiceover explained the meaning of what was happening, just the sound of Sam's breathing. Ragged, shallow, desperate, the sound of lungs trying to pull in air through a body that was already shutting down. The sound of a man dying on a subway car while everyone watched and nobody moved. He dropped to his knees, then to his side. His cheek pressed against the metal floor that was cold and filthy and smelled like 1,000 commutes and 1,000,000 indignities. Blood pooled beneath him, dark, thick, spreading. His hand reached out toward nothing, toward help that was not coming, toward mercy that did not exist in this place at this time under these circumstances. The white men stood over him, looked down, checked to make sure the job was finished. One of them wiped the blade on a handkerchief, folded it, put it back in his pocket. Casual, routine, like he had just finished changing a tire instead of ending a life. The train pulled into 155th Street. The doors opened. The 6 white men walked off, unhurried, unworried, unbothered by the fact that they had just committed murder in front of 30 witnesses who would tell police they saw nothing, heard nothing, knew nothing, because that was the only way to survive in a city where doing the right thing got you killed. The doors closed. The train moved on. Sam Price bled out on the floor, while my Johnson sat frozen in her seat, and the other passengers stared at walls and ceilings and anything except the man dying 3 feet away. In Harlem, good intentions have no exchange value. They cannot buy you safety, cannot purchase mercy, cannot be traded for the kind of justice that comes with badges and courtrooms and consequences for men who kill in front of crowds. Good intentions just get you killed slower than bad ones. And the only difference is how long you have to regret standing up when everyone else stayed seated. Sam's breathing stopped 7 minutes after the first stab. No ambulance, no doctor, no last words. Just silence, just stillness. Just one more body that would be discovered at the end of the line and reported as another tragedy in a city full of them. Another name that would appear in a police file that would never be investigated. Another family that would bury someone who died for reasons nobody would ever officially acknowledge. The blood stayed on the floor for the rest of the night. The cleaning crew would scrub it off at dawn, but the lesson would stick. The message was delivered. And Harlem would remember what happened when you forgot the rules and tried to be brave on a train where courage was just another word for suicide. My Johnson's hand went into her purse while Sam Price's blood spread across the floor like spilled wine. Her fingers found the pistol, a snub-nose revolver, chrome, small enough to hide, heavy enough to kill. Bumpy had given it to her 3 years ago with one instruction. If someone touches you, and I am not there, you do not wait for me. You handle it. She pulled the gun out. Slow, steady, no shaking. Her hand did not tremble. Her breath did not catch. She aimed at the back of the white man who had wiped his blade clean like Sam's life was dirt to be removed. The man who was already walking toward the door. The man who thought this was over. She pulled the trigger. Click. Empty. The sound echoed in that metal tube louder than any gunshot ever could. Louder than screams. Louder than prayers. One of the white men started walking back toward Mai. His hand went to his belt, to the knife, to the tool that had just opened Sam Price like a letter nobody wanted to read. He was going to use it again. On her. On anyone else who forgot that certain people do not fight back. Certain people just take it and survive, or take it and die. But they do not pull weapons. They do not click empty hammers. They do not try to kill white men on subway trains in 1947 New York. My sat perfectly still. Gun in hand, empty gun. Useless gun. Gun that was now evidence of intent. Evidence of attempted murder. Evidence that would justify whatever happened next. She did not drop it. Did not beg. Did not scream. She just sat there holding the weapon that had betrayed her and waited for the blade to come back and finish what it started with Sam. The train slowed. 163rd Street Station. The brakes squealed, metal on metal. The sound of something stopping that did not want to stop. The doors opened. Cool air rushed in from the platform. The smell of the city. Exhaust and rain and something burning somewhere far away. Bumpy Johnson stepped onto the train. He did not run, did not shout, did not draw a weapon. He just walked through the door like he was boarding any other subway car on any other night. Dressed in a suit that cost more than most men earned in 3 months. Shoes shined to mirrors. Hat tilted at an angle that said he knew exactly who he was and what that meant. He saw his wife holding a gun. Saw Sam Price bleeding out on the floor. Saw 6 white men frozen between the decision to run or finish what they started. Bumpy's face showed nothing, no rage, no fear, no surprise. Just the kind of cold calculation that came from a man who had seen worse, who had done worse, who understood that violence was not emotion. Violence was mathematics. Violence was problem-solving with consequences that lasted longer than the blood took to dry. His eyes moved across the 6 white men, memorizing, recording, cataloging. He looked at each face for exactly 3 seconds, long enough to burn it into memory, long enough that each man felt the weight of being seen, being marked, being added to a list that nobody wanted to be on. He did not speak, did not need to. His presence was the message. His silence was the threat. His stillness was more terrifying than any gun because it said he was not reacting. He was planning. And men who plan are more dangerous than men who rage because rage burns out. Plans simmer. Plans wait. Plans execute when you forget they exist. The white man with the knife stopped walking toward Mai. His hand moved away from his belt. His eyes dropped. Not in shame. In recognition. Recognition that this situation just became complicated in ways that required thinking instead of stabbing. Thinking about who this man in the expensive suit was. Thinking about why he walked onto this train like he owned it. Thinking about what it meant that he was not trying to stop them. He was just watching. Just remembering. The other 5 white men felt it too. Felt the shift. Felt the temperature in that car drop 20 degrees in 3 seconds. Felt the certainty they had moments ago dissolve into something colder, something that tasted like copper, like blood, like consequences that would not arrive tonight but would arrive. Eventually, inevitably, when they least expected it. Bumpy walked to his wife, took the empty gun from her hand, put it in his pocket, helped her stand. His movements were gentle, respectful, like she was porcelain, like she mattered more than anything else in this metal tube full of witnesses and corpses and men who had just made the worst mistake of their lives. He walked her toward the door, toward the platform, toward safety that existed outside this car where Sam Price's body was still leaking and the air smelled like iron and fear. He did not look back at the 6 white men, did not acknowledge them, did not threaten. He just left, taking his wife, taking his time, taking mental photographs that would develop in darkness and produce images nobody wanted to see. The doors closed. The train moved on. The 6 white men stood there breathing hard, trying to understand what just happened. Trying to convince themselves that nothing happened, that the man in the suit was nobody important, that this was over, that they could walk away and forget this night like it was just another shift of terrorizing people, too scared to fight back. But they knew, deep in whatever place holds truth that cannot be denied. They knew. The most dangerous man is not the one who attacks immediately, not the one who screams threats, not the one who pulls triggers. The most dangerous man is the one who watches, who waits, who remembers, who lets you walk away thinking you won so that when he comes for you later, you are not ready, you are not prepared, you are just prey that forgot predators exist. The train rattled through the tunnel. Sam Price's body cooled. The passengers still stared at nothing. And somewhere on the platform, at 163rd Street, Bumpy Johnson stood with his wife and began planning something that would make this night look merciful in comparison. Bumpy did not take my home. He took her to the barber shop on Lenox Avenue, the one with the red and white pole that never stopped spinning, the one where Harlem's pulse was measured in whispers and debts and handshakes that meant more than contracts. 3 a.m, closed, dark. But Bumpy had keys to every door that mattered in this neighborhood, and this door mattered tonight. Marcus was already inside, Bumpy's right hand, the man who ran the policy banks and kept the numbers runners honest, and made sure collections happened without bloodshed, unless bloodshed was the only language people understood. He stood when Bumpy entered, saw Mai's face, saw the emptiness in her eyes, saw whatever had died inside her on that train car. "Sam Price," Marcus asked. "Dead. One word. Clean. Final. No elaboration needed." Sam Price was dead. The how did not matter. The why did not matter. What mattered was the response. What mattered was making sure everyone understood that you do not kill in front of Bumpy Johnson's wife and expect to see sunrise. How many? Marcus already knew there would be a number. Knew this was not about grief or sadness or mourning. This was business. This was mathematics. This was balancing an equation that got unbalanced when 6 white men decided Harlem was a place they could hunt for sport. 6, Marcus nodded, pulled out a notebook, a pencil, started making lists, names, addresses, habits, weaknesses, the kind of information that took days to gather, but Marcus already had most of it because information was currency, and Marcus was rich. He knew who ran with Irish mobs, knew which bars they drank in, knew which women they visited, knew which routes they took home when they thought nobody was watching. Bumpy sat down in the barber chair, lit a cigarette. The smoke curled toward the ceiling in lazy spirals like it had all the time in the world. Like there was no rush. Like revenge was a meal best served cold, and he was willing to let it freeze solid before taking the first bite. "We do not massacre them," Bumpy said. His voice was quiet, conversational, like he was discussing weather instead of murder. "We do not light them up in the street. We do not make them martyrs. We make them examples. Examples how you shoot a man. He is dead. Problem solved. Everyone moves on. You mark a man. You wound him. You let him live with what he did. He carries that message everywhere he goes, every limp, every scar. Every moment he looks in a mirror and remembers why his face does not work right anymore. That is the message. That is what makes people think twice." Marcus understood. This was not about killing. Killing was easy. Killing was quick. Killing ended things. Bumpy did not want endings. He wanted beginnings. He wanted these 6 men to wake up every morning for the rest of their lives and remember what happens when you cross certain lines, when you touch certain women, when you forget that Harlem belongs to someone and that someone is not merciful when you spill blood in front of his wife. "How much damage?" Marcus asked, pencil ready, taking notes like he was planning a construction project instead of coordinated violence that would leave 6 men wishing they had died on that subway car. Enough that they never forget. Not enough that they die quick. Bumpy exhaled smoke. Kneecaps, hands, faces, the parts that do not heal right. The parts that make every day a reminder. We want them employed. We want them walking around. We want everyone who sees them to ask what happened, and we want them too scared to tell the truth. This was power, not the loud kind, not the kind that comes with guns blazing and bodies dropping and newspapers screaming about gang wars. The quiet kind, the kind that operates in shadows and whispers and wounds that do not kill but do not heal either. The kind that makes people understand that mercy has limits, and those limits were reached when 6 white men stabbed a war veteran to death because he asked them politely to stop. When? Marcus asked. Tonight, tomorrow night, next week, scattered, random. We do not want a pattern. We do not want police connecting dots. We want 6 separate incidents that look like bad luck or karma or God finally paying attention. We want each of them to spend every day wondering when it is their turn. When the knock comes. When the footsteps behind them stop being strangers and become the last sound they hear before something breaks that does not fix. Marcus wrote it all down. Names, targets, timing, methods. The kind of planning that turned rage into strategy. That turned grief into business. That turned one dead veteran into a message written in bone and scar tissue that Harlem would read for years. Bumpy stood, walked to where Mai sat silent in the corner, knelt down beside her, took her hand. His touch was gentle, his voice softer. "They will hurt," he said, "all 6. They will hurt for what they did. But they will live. And living will be worse than dying because every morning they will wake up and remember. And every night they will go to sleep, wondering if tonight is the night we come back to finish it. That is the price. That is what they bought when they killed Sam in front of you." Mai did not respond, did not cry, did not thank him. She just sat there holding her husband's hand while he planned calculated brutality that would masquerade as justice because real justice did not exist for people like Sam Price. Real justice did not arrive when black veterans got stabbed on subway trains. Real justice was something you built yourself with tools that terrified everyone watching. 7 minutes in that barbershop. 7 minutes of planning. 7 minutes that would turn into 7 lifetimes of pain for 6 men who thought they could walk away clean. Killing ends problems fast. Marking people creates consequences that echo, that spread, that teach lessons to everyone watching that some territories have borders and some women have protection, and crossing either one means you do not die. You just wish you did. Every single day. The police arrived at the subway station at 4:17 in the morning. 2 officers, both white, both tired, both already knowing this report would be filed in a drawer that nobody opened. They walked onto the train car where Sam Price's body had gone cold, where his blood had dried into the floor, where the smell of copper and death mixed with cigarette smoke and old sweat. The witnesses told identical stories. Word for word, sentence for sentence, like they had rehearsed, like someone had given them a script and made sure they memorized it perfectly. They saw nothing, heard nothing, noticed nothing unusual. 1 minute the train was normal. Next minute there was a body. No idea how it happened. No idea who did it. No idea if it was a fight or a robbery or just bad luck in a city full of it. The officers knew this song. Had heard it 1,000 times. Harlem had its own code, its own law, its own justice system that operated parallel to the one with badges and courtrooms and juries. You did not talk to cops. You did not snitch. You did not help investigations because helping cops meant you were a traitor, and traitors disappeared into basements and alleys and places where screaming brought no rescue. Nobody saw 6 white men get on this train, the older officer asked. His voice carried disbelief, but not surprise. Disbelief that people would lie this obviously. No surprise, because lying was survival in neighborhoods where cooperation with police meant your house burned down and your family learned what gasoline smells like when it is splashed across your living room floor. 27 witnesses shook their heads. No, sir. Did not see anyone. Train was mostly empty. Sam must have gotten on alone. Must have had enemies. Must have been involved in something. You know how these people are. Always fighting. Always killing each other over dice games and women and territory that nobody really owns anyway. The older officer closed his notebook. He had 3 kids at home. A mortgage. A pension that required he make it to retirement without getting his throat cut in some Harlem alley because he pushed too hard on a case nobody wanted solved. He looked at his partner. His partner shrugged. They both understood. This was one of those. "We will file the report," the older officer said to nobody in particular. To everyone. To the air itself. If anyone remembers anything useful, they can come to the station. Nobody would come to the station. Nobody would remember anything useful. The case would be filed under Negro male, unknown assailant, probably gang-related. Investigation closed due to lack of evidence. It would gather dust. It would be forgotten. And Sam Price would become another statistic in a city that produced statistics faster than it produced justice. The officers left. The train car was cleaned by morning shift workers who scrubbed blood with chemicals that burned their noses and made their eyes water. By 6 a.m., the car was back in service. By 7 a.m., commuters filled the seats where Sam had died. By 8 a.m., nobody remembered his name except the people who mattered. The people who kept lists. The people who did not forget. The people who understood that justice delayed was not justice denied when you had the patience to wait for the right moment. The police report landed on a detective's desk at noon. Detective William Morrison. 23 years on the force. 16 of them in Harlem. He read the report, read the witness statements, read between the lines that were wider than the gaps in a broken fence. He knew what this was. He knew who was involved. He knew what would happen next. And he knew that his job was to not know anything at all. Morrison walked to his captain's office. Captain Herbert Donnelly. 30 years in the department. Gray hair. Tired eyes. The kind of man who had seen every variation of human cruelty and stopped being surprised by any of it. "The subway killing," Morrison said. "Yes. It is Bumpy Johnson's problem now." Donnelly leaned back in his chair, let out a breath that carried the weight of decades of compromises and arrangements and deals made in rooms where justice was negotiable and peace was purchased with selective blindness. "You sure?" His wife was on that train. Veteran got killed defending her. 6 white men involved. Nobody talking. This is not our case anymore. This is Harlem's case, and Harlem has its own court system. Donnelly closed the file. Wrote closed, no leads across the front in red pen, signed it, put it in the cabinet where it would stay until the building fell down or someone demolished the precinct to build luxury apartments for people who would never know that murders were once filed and forgotten in the same drawer where their lease applications now lived. "We do not look for those 6 men," Donnelly said. It was not a question. It was an order. "We do not investigate if they turn up hurt. We do not connect dots. We do not make this a federal case. We let Harlem handle Harlem, and we focus on crimes where victims cooperate and witnesses testify, and our job actually matters." Morrison nodded. He understood. The city just took a step back. The law just withdrew. The police just made a decision that certain murders fall outside their jurisdiction, even though their jurisdiction theoretically covered every square inch of New York City. But theory and practice were different countries, and this was practice. This was reality. This was how things worked when you balanced order against chaos and decided that sometimes chaos confined to certain neighborhoods was better than chaos spreading everywhere. Morrison left, filed the paperwork, made sure the case was buried deep enough that no ambitious young officer would dig it up trying to make a name, made sure everyone understood that Sam Price's death was tragic but closed, finished, done. That was when Harlem began its work, when the police stepped back, the streets stepped forward, when official justice withdrew, unofficial justice advanced. Not with badges, not with warrants, not with rules about evidence and reasonable doubt and innocent until proven guilty, just with lists of names and addresses and the kind of patience that turns revenge into art and violence into education. 6 white men went about their lives, went to work, went to bars, went home, slept, dreamed, woke up, repeated. Not knowing that each day was numbered, not knowing that someone was watching, not knowing that the step back the police took created a vacuum, and vacuums get filled by whatever force is patient enough to wait for the right moment to rush in and equalize the pressure with methods that do not require paperwork, or courtrooms, or anything except cold calculation and colder execution. When law retreats 1 step, the street advances 10. And those 10 steps cover ground that courts will never measure, that judges will never weigh, that juries will never deliberate. Those 10 steps end in places where justice looks different, sounds different, smells different, tastes like copper and fear and the certainty that some debts get paid regardless of whether anyone with a badge decides to collect. Sean Murphy walked out of Finnegan's pub at 11:42. 3 whiskeys, 1 beer. Same as every night. Same route home through the alley on 47th Street. Same stupid mistake thinking patterns keep you safe. They were waiting. No warning. No words. Just the sound of lead pipe hitting kneecap. The sound bone makes when it separates from bone. Sean screamed, hit the ground. The second pipe took out his other knee. 3 swings each. Methodical. Professional. Like they had done this before. Then his fingers, 7 of them, bent backward until the joints popped, until bone came through skin. They left his thumbs so he could still hold things, still work, still look at his twisted hands every day and remember why. No explanation. No questions. They just broke him and left. Called an ambulance from 6 blocks away so he would not bleed out. They wanted him alive. Alive and broken. Alive to show everyone what happens when you cross into Harlem and forget some women have husbands. Sean told the police nothing. Random attack. Did not see faces. Could not identify anyone. The police wrote it down, knowing he was lying, knowing he would never tell, because telling meant admitting what he did on that subway. Admitting meant the next visit would not stop at kneecaps. 4 days later, they found Patrick Donnelly outside a Chelsea bar. Same lead pipes, same broken bones. But Patrick got special treatment. He held the knife. He opened Sam Price. So they took his right hand. Did not cut it off. Just destroyed it. Ball-peen hammer. 47 bones in the human hand. They broke 43. Patrick screamed until his voice died. Until the only sound left was the hammer falling. They left him conscious, left him broken, left him to explain why his hand looked like crushed gravel. The Irish mob boss Callahan heard about Sean and Patrick, sent word through channels. Sit down, negotiate, end this before every dock worker in Hell's Kitchen starts wondering if they are next. Bumpy met him at a restaurant in Little Italy. Neutral ground. Callahan sat across from him with 2 bodyguards. Face red, fists clenched. This ends now. You made your point. 2 of my boys are crippled. Now we stop before this becomes a war. Bumpy sipped his coffee. Let the silence stretch. Let Callahan understand who needed this meeting more. 4 more. What, 4 more of your boys learn the same lesson, then we stop. Then this is finished. Callahan's face went darker. His bodyguards tensed. You think I will just accept that 6 of your men killed a veteran in front of my wife? 2 paid. 4 more will pay. If you try to stop me, we will see how many soldiers you have willing to die protecting men who murdered a war hero. Bumpy set down his cup. The sound echoed. Choose carefully. Callahan calculated. Wars cost money, cost lives, cost reputation. He could not admit publicly he could not control his men enough to keep them out of Harlem. 4 more. Then we are even. Then this ends. Bumpy stood, adjusted his hat. 4 more. Then we are done. Callahan tried to protect his remaining 4 men, moved them, changed their patterns, gave them bodyguards, told them stay inside, wait for this to blow over. But Harlem was patient. The 3rd man fell, 2 weeks later. 4th, 3 weeks after that. 5th made it a month. The 6th lasted 6 weeks. 6 weeks looking over his shoulder. 6 weeks jumping at shadows. 6 weeks knowing they were coming and unable to stop it. When they finally took him, the relief in his eyes was visible. Relief that the waiting was over. By the time the 6th man was broken and delivered back to Hell's Kitchen, Callahan understood. You do not beat patience. You just accept the lesson and make sure your men never forget it. The week after the 6th man fell, something changed in Harlem. Not obvious, not loud, but everyone felt it, felt the temperature drop, felt the shift. People walked different, heads higher, eyes meeting instead of dropping. Not arrogance, just quiet confidence that comes from knowing your territory has teeth, that your neighborhood has protection, that crossing certain lines means consequences. Courts will not deliver, but streets will. The numbers game continued. Policy banks operated. Money flowed. Life went on. But underneath was new understanding. New equation. Harlem was not hunting ground. Not a place where white mobs could ride in and terrorize people for sport. Harlem belonged to Harlem, and Harlem belonged to Bumpy Johnson. The police noticed. 6 white men crippled over 6 weeks, all similar injuries, all refusing to identify attackers. The pattern was obvious, the message clear, but proving it required witnesses who would testify and victims who would cooperate. Both were in short supply when the alternative meant explaining to a jury why you stabbed a war veteran because he asked you to stop harassing a woman. Detective Morrison filed reports, documented injuries, interviewed victims who lied through broken teeth. He knew what was happening, knew who ordered it, but proving it was different than knowing it. The newspapers ignored it. Negro veteran killed on subway got 3 paragraphs on page 17. 6 white dock workers injured in separate incidents over 6 weeks did not rate mention because dock workers got injured all the time. So Harlem went cold that winter in silence, in whispers, in knowing that spreads through communities faster than official news. Everyone understood. Everyone remembered. My Johnson returned to normal life, shopping, church, walking through her neighborhood like nothing happened. But everyone who saw her understood what she represented. Understood she was untouchable not because of laws but because of the man who married her. Sam Price was buried with full military honors, flag on coffin, veterans firing salute. His family received monthly payments from anonymous source that covered rent and food. Nobody asked where the money came from. Nobody needed to ask. Harlem took care of its own. The 6 white men lived, survived. Every morning they woke up and remembered. Every time their broken hands would not grip. Every time their destroyed knees sent lightning up their spines. Every time they looked in mirrors and saw faces that did not work right anymore. They remembered. They did not talk about it. Not to police. Not to family. Talking meant admitting. Admitting meant consequences, so they just lived with it. lived with the pain, lived with the knowledge that they had crossed a line and the man on the other side was merciful enough to let them breathe, but cruel enough to make breathing hurt every single day. Harlem went cold because of respect, the kind that comes from watching someone absorb violence and respond with calculation. The kind that comes from seeing unofficial justice work better than official justice. The temperature dropped. The rules changed. The message spread. And New York City learned what it should have known all along. Harlem was not conquered territory, not open season. Harlem was home, protected, defended. And crossing into it with bad intentions meant you might leave alive. But you would never leave whole. Samuel Price was buried on a Saturday in November 1947. Rain fell like the sky was crying. 200 people attended, veterans in uniform, neighbors who never spoke to Sam but understood what he represented. The coffin was closed. What the knife did was not something families needed to see. Better to remember him standing. Remember him in his army jacket. Remember him as the man who stepped between violence and a woman when everyone else stayed seated. His mother stood at the grave and did not cry. Too old for tears. She just stood while they lowered her son into ground that did not care what he died for. After the burial, an envelope appeared at her door. No return address, just $500 in cash. More money than she had seen in her life. Enough to cover burial and rent for 6 months. She knew where it came from. This was how Harlem honored its dead. With cash that kept families fed. Every month after. Another envelope. $100. Regular. Anonymous. Enough that Sam's mother did not have to work herself to death. Enough she could grow old with dignity. My Johnson never spoke about that night. Never testified. Never gave statements. She just returned to normal life. Walked through Harlem like royalty. Not because she demanded it. Because people gave it. Gave her respect. Gave her acknowledgement that she had survived something and carried it with grace. The 6 white men scattered. Sean Murphy moved to Boston. Could not work docks anymore. Knees did not bend. Hands could not grip. He swept floors in a factory. Spent his life looking over his shoulder, wondering if Harlem was patient enough to follow him. To remind him geography does not erase debt. Patrick Donnelly stayed in New York, but wished he had not. Destroyed hand meant no work. Wife left. Children stopped talking. He drank himself to death over 12 years. Died alone in a flophouse. Cirrhosis. Poverty. Regret. The other 4 scattered to Philadelphia, Baltimore, Chicago. They lived. They survived. But never stopped looking over shoulders. Never stopped wondering. Never stopped waking from nightmares where lead pipes fell and bones broke. Bumpy Johnson never mentioned Sam Price. Never spoke his name. Just continued running Harlem. Policy banks. Numbers runners. Order maintained through fear and respect and understanding that crossing certain lines meant consequences courts could not deliver. He died in 1968. Heart attack. Quick. Clean. His funeral was attended by thousands. Carlo Gambino sent a wreath that cost $3,000. Card said nothing except acknowledgement. Acknowledgement that Bumpy had carved territory the 5 families respected. The lesson was not about violence. Violence is cheap. The lesson was about accountability, about making sure actions had consequences, about understanding some debts get paid regardless of whether courts acknowledge them. Samuel Price paid with his life. 7 minutes of courage. His payment bought respect, bought boundaries, bought understanding that Harlem was not hunting ground. The 6 white men paid with their bodies. Knees that never worked, hands that could not grip, faces that reminded them daily. Their payment bought them life. Broken life, painful life, which was more mercy than they showed Sam. Who paid the higher price, Sam who died quick, or 6 who lived slow? Sam paid once, The six paid every day. Sam's pain ended. Theirs never did. Real power is not what you destroy. It is what you build, what you protect. Bumpy Johnson built Harlem into territory that stood independent. Made sure unofficial justice worked when official justice failed. Built something that lasted decades. That is what Samuel Price bought with 7 minutes on a subway floor. That is what 6 white men learned too late. Some lines exist for reasons worth dying to enforce and worth living broken to remember. Samuel Price died in 7 minutes, but that death froze Harlem for 72 hours. Not because of fear, because everyone understood the rules just got rewritten. 6 white men walked onto that train thinking they owned every space they entered. They stabbed a war veteran for asking them to stop. They walked away laughing. 72 hours later. All 6 were broken, kneecaps shattered, hands destroyed. Living reminders that some debts get paid when the law looks away. Harlem did not riot, did not protest, just went cold. Quiet, calculated, and rewrote the rules in lead pipes and shattered bone. If you were on that train that night, what would you choose, stay silent to survive, or stand up and become the price your whole neighborhood paid for respect? Drop a comment. What would you do? Hit like if you think some places handle their own justice when the law fails. Subscribe for more stories, the city buried, but the streets remember. Because some lessons are not taught in courtrooms. They are taught in alleys, in broken bones, in 72 hours that changed everything. This is one of those lessons.